Today we're going to talk about human activities and how they change the coastal landscape of the UK. And there's no better way to start than 4 fantastic photos of the Sussex coastline. Top left we can see a dramatic aerial photo of the Bexhill-Pevensey coastline. Top right we've got some winter destructive waves crashing against the sea defence. Bottom left, this is Bexhill itself, I believe. Wooden groynes, sea defences that we can see here. And the bottom right, there's lots of going on in that photograph. We can see some cliffs that are being eroded in the background, some wooden groynes in the background also, and some sea-tolerant coastal vegetation. This is halophytic vegetation, sea kale and a few others in there as well. This topic of coastal landscapes in the Edexcel syllabus requires a deep dive on the UK coastline itself. I'm going to look specifically at Sussex, also a little visit to Norfolk as well for a different reason, but we're mainly going to concentrate on the Sussex coastline here, and that's mainly because I'm currently living in this area and teaching around this area, and my students will visit this coastline itself. We'll look at Pevensey, Bexhill, and also Brighton over here, and Eastbourne. Let's look at the specification itself. It's always worth having a look at the specification and ensuring that you are learning the content as laid down by Edexcel. So we're going to have a look at 4.4 in the updated Edexcel specification. So this is our human activities, so specifically development, or what that means by development, agriculture, industry and coastal management. We're looking at the direct effects and the indirect effects on coastal landscapes, i.e. how it is shaped, what it looks like and how it's used. One way to think about this in a shorthand way, I like these word thought links I use quite a lot, that human activity on the coastline, we're looking for the effects, we're looking for the benefits, we're looking for the challenges. Now, to make it a little bit easier, I've broken this down, this 4.4a point in the specification I've broken down into several sections. The first is development, housing and retirement development, and that's because there's a very specific difference between housing and retirement coastal towns and those commercial leisure and development towns. Now, on the Sussex coastline, there are stark differences in those areas, but of course we have coastal towns that hit both those requirements of development. Third point is agriculture, as laid down in the specification. The fourth is industry. So for that, we're going to have a look at another area of the UK, in Norfolk. And then the final point on coastal management, that's on holderness, which we'll cover in another lesson, combining the back end of 4.4a and 4.4b as well. So the named coastline we'll use is the Holderness coastline. That's up in Yorkshire, really interesting coastline, which I've taken students on field study up there as well. So there's a lot to see there. So that's what we'll do on the next lesson. Okay, let's look at the first development activity, and specifically in this area of Bexhill. So here's some great photographs of Bexhill. You can see it's a coastal town, a well-used coastal town, a well-developed coastal town. Some shots of the pavilion. So this is an area that has a high percentage of people over 65. There are seafront apartments there. There is a promenade, but also there is lots of private care homes. So that is not to say that everybody over 65 is in a private care home. Many of the over 65s living in Bexhill are in their own accommodation. But what's interesting, a recent study, only a few years now, actually 3 years now, Bexhill has the best quality of life for pensioners across the UK. So there's definitely something going on there in terms of the development of housing there, but also other aspects that ensure a good quality of life for the people of Bexhill-on-Sea. So human activity on the coastline really just describes on how we are changing the land, how we are using the land. So it's about land use change. We're going to look now at how housing changes the coastal town of Bexhill. I suppose the first thing to say when we think about housing development, whilst it does change the land, there is land use change. There are other things that it changes within the coastal environment. One is the economy, so the local economy, the population structure, the services, the types of services that are available on offer and exist, and also coastal management priorities. This really means what the local authorities are doing or having to do due to changes in housing development. This also means environmental pressures. That's always the case where we see urban expansion, where we see development of residential or commercial properties. But in Bexhill is largely known for a retirement town. That's, like I said, it is 35%, but it's also a commuter town as well. So it's a desirable place where people like to live. We can classify some of the changes in Bexhill in these ways. What's happening to the population structure, the local economy, what's happening with coastal protection, and what are the environmental pressures due to urban expansion. So in Bexhill-on-Sea, we see specific types of supermarkets, cafes, restaurants, of course care services, and we see lots of new housing. So the new housing creates construction jobs as well. This also provides pressure. There's also ensures pressure in the environment. So we see habitat disturbance. There's certainly pressure on beaches and a loss of green space and greater surface runoff. The coastal protection, due to the pressure of increasing numbers of housing and investment by private and commercial, we see more a pressure on producing more and designing more coastal defences, and an imperative to protect homes. The population structure, we've already mentioned a high proportion of those over 65, but also what this means is there's a high demand for healthcare. So a high demand for healthcare means young workers and additionally more retirement homes. So another way to think about these four changes that we see due to the changing of due to development is through the social, economic and environmental lens. Okay, let's look at a exam question that we might get on something like this. So assess how human activity has changed a named coastal town. So an assess question, this is about making a judgment about how important, successful or significant something is. So while we're looking at human activity, this is how significant the impacts of human activity have been versus the physical. It's all about the interaction between human and physical. So you are assessing the extent of change, how impactful human activity is, whether physical processes still matter more, so in a final statement, and a structure for this could be this: point, evidence, counterpoint, and a judgment. So I'm just going to outline this quickly. You might want to pause this or come back a bit later to have a look at this, or you may want to pause it now and have a go yourself using the previous slide. Housing development has significantly changed Bexhill-on-Sea by increasing demand for coastal protection and encouraging the growth of retirement and a service-based economy. Good point made. New housing and seafront development have increased pressure to protect properties from erosion and flooding, leading to investment in sea defences such as sea walls and groynes. Housing growth has also changed the local economy because more retired residents and visitors support shops, cafes, healthcare services and tourism-related businesses. This has made Bexhill more focused on services rather than traditional coastal industries. There's your evidence. However, physical processes such as longshore drift, erosion and storms continue to shape the coastlines. This is the counterpoint. Overall, human activity has greatly changed Bexhill, but these changes are strongly influenced by the need to manage physical processes. So that's our judgment. So now let's look at the second strand of development. This is around commercial and leisure. And for this, we're going to move slightly west and have a look at the areas of Eastbourne and Brighton. Now, Brighton's very famous on the south coast, in London and the southeast. Most people have gone to Brighton. It's not too far from London. It's a famous and popular tourist place. Latest figures around spend are £886 million in visitor spend. So you can imagine, of course, with that level of spend, there is a lot of investment in urban town planning, urban coastal planning, as well as coastal management strategies, otherwise known as sea defences. In Brighton, there is a pier, there is a marina, there are beachfront businesses, there is hotels and nightlife and conference tourism. Eastbourne is more a traditional seaside mix, lots of tourism with a large retirement mix there as well. Brighton and Eastbourne show how human activity can shape the coastline for economic gain. However, protecting tourism and housing often means interfering with the natural coastal processes, creating environmental challenges elsewhere along the coast. So this interaction is between always the thoughts about human and physical geography. I'm going to show you a really good example of what's happening in Brighton now. It's in the process, in the planning stages. This is the Brighton Marina project. So Brighton might not have the weather of the Mediterranean, although that's changing over recent years, but it still has carries a lot of economic weight and is really, really important socially, economically and environmentally to the local area and the wider area. Some of the benefits and challenges are numerous, but for this level at GCSE, you don't have to know and remember a lot. It's about applying your understanding. So again, we're going to use the social, economic, and environmental structure framework. For example, if we wanted to talk about the social benefits, we might want to talk about Brighton's seafront attractions, its nightlife, its cultural events, its entertainment. If you're looking at another area of the UK, you're closer to a coastline somewhere else, it's worth just having a look at that and make sure you understand the local context. If you're doing GCSE, you'll be visiting a coastline anyway, so you might be able to replace some of these ideas that are specific to the Sussex South Coast to where you are. An economic reason: Brighton Marina, hotels, restaurants, leisure business create thousands of jobs and bring significant income into the local economy. And an environmental benefit might be regeneration. And this can improve neglected urban environments and create cleaner, more attractive public spaces. Okay, so that's our two development human activities. One around a retirement town in Bexhill, what that means for population structure, what that means for services, and the other one is the commercial, which we looked at Brighton and Eastbourne. Now let's look at a third, human activity, and for this we're going to go back east along the coastline to the Pevensey Levels. So this is the Sussex coast Pevensey Levels. So these are low-lying coastal wetlands. If you look at the background of this picture here in the top right, you'll see the coastline there. So this is a low-lying coastal wetlands, really important for farming land. It is an environmentally sensitive area. All our coastal wetlands in the UK certainly are, and it is at risk from flooding, even more so, and through sea level rise. Now, agriculture as a human activity affects coastal landscapes both directly and indirectly. So directly, this is agriculture changing the landscape through activities happening on the land itself. So for example, farmers will drain wetlands and marshes to create that farmland. Hedgerows, natural vegetation may be removed. Indirectly, agriculture affects the coast by increasing pressure for management and changing environmental systems. So examples of that might be use of fertilizers, pesticides, which can get into the rivers, the river system and coastal waters. But also farming may increase flood risk if the wetlands are removed. It's another dramatic picture of the Pevensey Levels. Let's have a look again in this kind of word thought link about how humans have changed the Pevensey Levels. So the Pevensey Levels were originally large wetlands and marshes. Humans have drained parts of these wetlands to create more farmland for grazing and for agriculture. But however, these wetlands, important point to make, they've naturally store large amounts of water during heavy rainfall or prolonged heavy rainfall and flooding. So when these wetlands are drained, the land loses some of its natural flood storage capacity. So this means today that the area is more vulnerable to flooding, especially as sea levels rise due to climate change. So rising sea levels really increase the risk of seawater flooding these low-lying coastal areas like the Pevensey Levels. And the next human activity we're going to look at is industry. So as I said, we're going to visit another part of the UK. So this is Norfolk, the Norfolk coastline. It's a really important area for a whole host of different reasons. And the coastline there experiences, as all areas of the UK coastline, there are lots of physical processes which we're going to look at. The importance of industry as a human activity on the coast, and the example we're going to use here is the gas terminal. This is a really important piece of national infrastructure. The map on the right hand side shows the gas interconnector pipes around the UK. So this gas terminal here receives gas from the North Sea and supplies a third of UK gas. However, it is located on a actively eroding coastline due to the physical processes. Now into the physical geography, the physical processes that occur on this coastline. They are destructive waves which erode cliffs and the beaches. On the left hand side you can see some dramatic pictures of cliffs that have been eroded. Longshore drift, this is the movement of sediment away from some areas, starving some beaches. Storm surges increase coastal flooding and erosion and the long-term risk of sea level rise. So sea defences are very important, as you can see from those dramatic pictures. That was a storm from 2013, a storm surge which damaged a lot of homes on that coast. So we'll look at coastal management strategies in the next lesson. This lesson is all about the human activities. But it's worth pointing out some of the sea defences there as well, because that's part of what human activities. So how they change the landscape in themselves. So in this picture here, we can see that a cliff is retreating due to erosion. There's some large pieces of not just stones here. We can see concrete and rock, but this is concrete and rock, concrete that has collapsed onto the beach. Here is a revetment in the foreground and some groynes in the background. The cliff here, which has clearly been eroded down at some point here, maybe perhaps for all this revetments here. We've also got some mass movement and slumping you can see around here, and the Bacton Terminal is above this area here. So I'll show you a picture of the Bacton Terminal now, so you get an idea of how big this is, and you might have an indication of whereabouts these some cliffs are as well. And the importance really of human activity on the coastline for industry can't be understated. There's a really good example here, because we're talking about major industry that supplies energy, so that it gets into those questions of energy supply and energy security. So I'm going to show you a short clip of when the Bacton Terminal was open in the 60s. And this is a good clip. Seems older than the 60s, but gives you kind of a good feeling of how important this is. This was and still is to the rest of the country.
Like islands of steel, the rigs stand in the North Sea, bleeding off the riches that nature had sealed in far below them. Gas, natural gas. Nobody knows how much, but it's been captured and tamed. At Brighton, Norfolk, it's put to work. This is the Gas Council's North Sea Gas Terminal. The helicopter arriving at this bleak 200-acre clifftop site was bringing Prince Philip. He was to perform the inauguration ceremony of the complex, which is operated not only by the Gas Council, but also by combines of private gas-getting companies, which bring the high-speed stuff ashore and sell it to the council for processing and eventually feeding into the gas pipes of the nation. The terminal is designed to handle up to 4,000 million cubic feet of natural gas a day, the equivalent of more than 3 times the gas made at Britain's 200 gas works last year. It's a staggering figure, but at the same time, a good indication of the high hopes pinned on the wealth waiting beneath the sea. Because of the massive quantities of gas passing through the Bacton Terminal and the important role the gas will play in providing the nation's power, reliability has been a major factor in its building. The Prince saw the alternative and emergency systems which continuously feed the gas away to where it's needed, factories and homes. And so Prince Philip had seen the shape of Britain's gas power. As has become expected of him, he had looked, listened, asked, and learned about the new place with so much promise for the future. With the symbolic unveiling of the commemorative plaque, Bacton Terminal was in the high-speed gas business, its pipes pumping out the natural product of millions of years of chemical evolution to cope with the demands of this modern world. The entire image of the domestic and industrial use of gas has undergone a marked transformation. Today, the picture of a smelly, smoky, rather Victorian industry is being replaced by this. What does natural gas mean to us? It means that gas bills will be lower than they would have been if the industry had continued to make gas from coal or oil. It means for the country as a whole, a balance of payment saving reaching £100 million a year. Gas, one might say, has that sweet smell of success about it.
And let's have a look at a bit of a dodgy drone, but it's quite good. Gives an overview of the size, really, of the Bacton Terminal. So we've seen the importance of the Bacton Terminal. We've seen that this is a coastline that experiences the physical processes that erode and attack the coastline. Let's look at a solution in place there, and this is called sandscaping. So students might have already known this term, beach nourishment. So sandscaping is really a very, very large beach nourishment project. It's really started in 2019 when millions of cubic meters of sand were added to the beaches near Bacton. So the aim there was to widen the beaches, absorb wave energy, reduce erosion, and of course protect the villages and the gas terminal. What Bacton shows really that the coastlines with important economic infrastructure, like the Norfolk coastline here, are more likely to receive expensive protection than less economically valuable areas. So I'm going to show you a clip now, a small clip on the sand nourishment project, or the sandscaping. designed to protect the terminal, the villages, and change the sediment movement.
The Norfolk Sandscaping scheme was delivered by North Norfolk District Council's Coastal Partnership East team on behalf of the project partners, and is the first of its kind in the UK and outside of the Netherlands. Bacton Gas Terminal supplies up to 1/3 of the UK's gas demand and lies alongside the villages of Bacton and Walcott on the North Norfolk coast. The North Norfolk cliffs have long suffered from coastal erosion, with flooding at Walcott during storm events. The scheme was designed to provide protection for the terminal and the nearby villages. Designed by Royal Haskening DHV, the project took learning from the Dutch sand motor and, using detailed modelling, developed a design to provide the protection required. During the spring and summer of 2019, Team Van Oord delivered the scheme working 24 hours a day. Sand was collected by Van Oord's Ham 318 offshore from Great Yarmouth, and in just 6 weeks, 1.8 million cubic metres of sand was transported to Bacton and pumped through a 1 kilometre pipe to shore. At times, over 200 metres of new beach were created in one day. The sediment placed will move over time, feeding adjacent beaches and those further afield. The raised and lengthened beaches absorb the wave energy, which protects the cliffs, sea defences, assets and villages. Since its completion, monitoring, funded by partners, the Environment Agency and the Dutch Government Partners for Water scheme, will assess the performance of the project, providing valuable information for future sandscaping within the UK and worldwide. The successful delivery of this world first outside the Netherlands has better protected a nationally important gas terminal, 300 homes from erosion and a further 100 homes from flooding, while enhancing the natural beaches for recreation and the environment.
So armed with that information, we want to think about a good evaluate question. So evaluate the coastal management scheme of sandscaping in Norfolk. So this certainly won't be the type of wording you'll see in an exam. I've just made it specific so you're using this example. Again, let's recover the evaluate question. So evaluate questions, this is just judging how successful, effective or worthwhile something is. So in this context, we're looking at the advantages or the benefits, the successes, and extend then the disadvantages, the limitations, and then reach a supported judgment. So I've put this in a table for you. You may want to pause the video now and have a go at that question. You've got the categories of social, economic and environmental just to give you that greater depth, enabling you to write in 3 separate sections or make 3 separate points under those categories. But of course then it's that split down between the paragraphs of benefits and challenges. So really you've got a lot to write about there, that if something like this was a question like this was an 8-mark question, you'll be able to answer. So you may want to pause it now and I will put on a model answer in a moment. Thanks for listening.